The air in the village of Marrowdell always thickened on the eve of the new year, as though the skies themselves held their breath for the turning of time. Mist coiled like serpents around the narrow cobblestone streets, silencing the world beneath its shroud. The festival preparations were nearly complete, though an unnatural hush permeated the air. Tonight, the ceremonial lantern would be lit, and Renna had been chosen, though she did not feel like one meant for honor. She sat alone by her hearth, the faint warmth of the fire licking at her face. Outside, children ran through the fog, their laughter muffled by the enclosing mist. The walls of her cottage seemed to press inward, their shadows weaving tales of the life she had once known, the life that had shattered so cruelly. Renna's hands trembled as they traced the intricate carvings of the lantern she would carry tonight. An heirloom passed from elder to chosen bearer. Only the lost are called, the old villagers had whispered when her name was announced. Renna heard them, though they spoke as if she were absent. The lantern will guide her, or perhaps it will reveal her. These words clung to her, heavy with meanings they would not share. Still, she could not refuse. To decline the role was to refuse the village's fragile hope. The lantern was more than tradition. It was a talisman against the unknown. And in Marrowdell, the unknown was always closer than it seemed. The forest shrine stood at the village's edge, where the cobblestones gave way to gnarled roots and whispering leaves. By the time Renna reached it, dusk had begun its descent. The horizon bled in streaks of orange and violet, but the forest shadows were already deep, as if they absorbed the light before it could touch the ground. Renna hesitated at the entrance, the lantern flickering in her hands. Its glow felt fragile, as though the night could snuff it out with a single breath. She glanced back toward the village. Figures moved like spectres in the distance, their shapes blurred by the encroaching mist. None would follow her here. This part of the ritual was hers alone. A chill wind pressed against her back, urging her forward. She stepped into the forest, the lantern her only companion. The trees here grew too close, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. Renna's footsteps faltered as the path narrowed, the air thick with an eerie stillness. The lantern's light seemed weak, swallowed by the endless dark. Her breath quickened, and she clutched the handle tighter, as though its warmth could tether her to the world she knew. Yet there was something more than silence in the forest. A rustle, faint and rhythmic, not unlike the sound of dry leaves stirred by a breeze. Renna stopped, her pulse drumming in her ears. The sound came again, closer now, though the air was still. Then she saw it, a single point of light, hovering just beyond the lantern's reach. It blinked once, twice, then disappeared, only to reappear further along the path. A firefly, she thought, though it shone brighter than any she had seen before. As her eyes adjusted, more began to appear. their glow soft yet insistent, forming a constellation-like trail deeper into the forest. The villagers had spoken of the Firefly Parade, though never to her directly. It was a tale murmured around hearths, shared in fragments that dissolved like smoke when questioned. Some claimed it was a blessing, a guide for those who had lost their way. Others spoke of it as a test, a trial that demanded sacrifice. Renna had never believed in such things, until now. The fireflies moved as one, a silent tide of light beckoning her forward. She hesitated, glancing back toward the path she had taken. The forest behind her was suffocatingly dark, the way back obliterated by shadows. She felt her choices narrow, her will bending beneath the weight of inevitability. "Only the lost are called," she whispered, the villagers' words echoing in her mind. And so, with trembling hands and a lantern that seemed to dim in their glow, Renna stepped into the firefly's path. The air grew warmer, the mist lighter, but a strange unease clung to her, as though she were walking a thread suspended above an endless abyss. The fireflies pulsed softly around her, their rhythm like a heartbeat. They were leading her somewhere. Of that, she was certain. But where? And for what purpose? The forest gave no answers, its shadows only deepening as she followed the trail. The fireflies danced ahead, their light weaving a path through the unknown, while Renna's heart swelled with questions she dared not ask aloud. In the distance, a faint hum began to rise, so faint it might have been her imagination. Yet it was not the forest she feared most. It was the weight of her own unspoken hope. The hum grew louder as Renna followed the firefly's luminous path, a sound that neither belonged to the forest nor to the wind. It was a resonance, low and ancient, as if the trees themselves were murmuring a secret too vast to comprehend. The fireflies danced in harmony with the sound, their light pulsing in a rhythmic cadence that tugged at her senses. Renna's lantern flickered weakly now, its flame shrinking as though yielding to the firefly's brilliance. She tightened her grip on the handle, unsure if she carried the lantern for her own comfort, or if it was carrying her. Shadows loomed on either side of the trail, shifting in ways that made her doubt they were cast by her light. The world felt untethered here. The boundaries between what was real and what was not dissolving with each step. Then the whispering began. At first, it was faint, a susurration blending with the hum, indistinguishable from the rustling leaves. But as Renna moved deeper into the forest, the whispers sharpened, their words brushing against her mind like threads of silk. They came from nowhere and everywhere, speaking not in any language she knew, but in tones that felt like the echoes of forgotten dreams. She comes. She seeks. She doubts. The fireflies formed a tighter cluster ahead, their glow intensifying as they guided her to a clearing. Renna hesitated at its edge, the whispers rising in a crescendo that made her ears ring. She tried to focus, but the forest felt alive now, its breath on her neck, its gaze pressing against her back. Her heart raced, the pulse of her blood mingling with the rhythm of the firefly's light. "Who speaks?" she called out, her voice breaking the stillness. The whispers faltered, and for a moment the forest was silent. Then a single voice emerged from the quiet, clearer than the others, but no less otherworldly. "We are what remains." Renna's grip on the lantern faltered, the weight of the words sinking into her chest. The fireflies began to move again, their light spilling into the clearing. Against her better judgment, she followed. The clearing was vast and impossibly still, its edges blurred as though the forest itself had withdrawn in deference. The fireflies swirled upward, their light forming a spiral that stretched toward the sky. Renna stepped forward, the lantern's dim flame casting faint, flickering shadows at her feet. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift when she looked too closely. The fireflies circled the altar, their hum now a chorus that filled the air with an almost unbearable intensity. Renna approached cautiously, the whispers returning as she neared the stone. "You carry a burden," they said, each word striking her like the toll of a bell. "It binds you, it blinds you. Will you release it?" The question hung in the air, weighty and unrelenting. Renna stared at the altar, her breath shallow. She thought of the life she had left behind, of the loss that had hollowed her out and left her adrift. The lantern in her hand felt heavier now, its flame dimmer than ever. It had been her guide through the darkness, yet here, in the presence of the firefly's light, it seemed inconsequential. "Release it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "How?" The whispers grew softer, their tones almost tender. "Let it fall. Trust the light." Renna hesitated, the lantern trembling in her hands. She had clung to it for so long, its warmth the only thing that had kept her from succumbing to the cold. To let it go felt unthinkable, yet the firefly's light surrounded her, soothing and insistent. Their glow seemed to promise something she could not name, but desperately craved. Slowly she lowered the lantern to the altar. Its light flickered one last time before extinguishing, leaving her in the glow of the fireflies. The whispers faded into silence, and for a moment the clearing was still. Then the fireflies moved. They swirled around Renna in a dazzling display, their light merging into a golden tide that washed over her. She felt it seep into her skin, her bones, her very soul, filling the empty spaces within her. Memories rose unbidden to her mind, memories of laughter, of joy, of a life before grief had claimed her. They played like scenes from a forgotten dream, vivid and bittersweet. Tears streamed down her face, though she could not say if they were born of sorrow or relief. The firefly's light grew brighter, their hum rising to a crescendo before abruptly falling silent. The clearing was plunged into quiet once more, but Renna no longer felt alone. She looked down at the altar. The lantern was gone, its weight lifted from her hands. In its place lay a single firefly, its glow steady and calm. It hovered for a moment before rising to join the others, its light merging with theirs as they formed a trail leading deeper into the forest. Renna followed without hesitation, her steps lighter than they had been in years. The whispers no longer haunted her. Instead, they seemed to sing, their melody one of hope and renewal. The firefly's path stretched endlessly before her, but for the first time, Renna did not fear the unknown. The light would guide her, and she would follow. The trail led Renna deeper into the forest, where the trees grew taller and their shadows darker. The fireflies continued their dance, their golden light carving a path that defied the laws of the natural world. The whispers had faded to a soft murmur, blending with the forest's stillness. Yet the air grew heavier, charged with an unspoken tension, as though the trees themselves held their breath. The path widened, revealing a small glade surrounded by ancient oaks. Their branches stretched skyward like twisted fingers, and their roots clawed at the earth, creating an uneven floor that seemed to shift beneath her feet. The fireflies hesitated, their light dimming slightly as they spread out across the glade. Renna stopped, her breath catching as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, or at least, it appeared to be. His features were indistinct, his form shifting like smoke caught in the breeze. Yet his eyes were sharp and unyielding, burning with a light that seemed to pierce through Renna's very soul. He stood at the center of the glade, unmoving, as though waiting for her. "Who are you?" Renna asked, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, its gaze never leaving hers. When it spoke, its voice was low and resonant, carrying a weight that felt almost unbearable. "I am what you left behind." The words struck her like a blow, and her knees nearly buckled beneath her. Memories surged forward unbidden. Her brother's laughter, his hand in hers as they walked through the village, the warmth of his presence that had been ripped away in an instant. She clenched her fists, willing the memories back into the depths where she had buried them. "You're not him," she whispered, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. The figure smiled, a shadowy curve of lips that held no warmth. "No," it said, stepping closer. "But I wear his face, because it is the face you cannot forget." Renna stumbled back, her heart pounding. The fireflies circled her protectively, their light growing brighter as the figure advanced. Yet it did not retreat, its presence growing heavier with each step. "Why do you linger in the past?" it asked, its voice cutting through her like a blade. "Why do you clutch at shadows when the light calls you forward?" Renna shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't choose this," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't choose to lose him. I didn't choose to be left behind. The figure stopped, its form flickering like a dying flame. No, it said, its tone softer now. But you choose to remain in the darkness. You choose the weight of grief over the freedom of light. The fireflies pulsed around her, their glow intensifying as if urging her to listen. Renna's chest ached, the truth in the figure's words cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. She had clung to her sorrow, wrapped herself in it like a shroud, because letting go felt like betrayal. I don't know how, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure's form shimmered, its edges blurring until it was little more than a shadow against the firefly's glow. You will, it said, its voice now barely more than a whisper. But only if you choose to move forward. And with that, the figure dissolved into the darkness, leaving only the faint echo of its presence. The firefly's light enveloped Renna, their warmth soothing the raw edges of her heart. She sank to her knees, the weight of her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. But as the fireflies circled closer, their light seemed to seep into her, filling the empty spaces within her soul. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't known in years. Hope. The fireflies gathered once more, forming a single glowing path that led out of the glade. Renna stood, her legs shaky, but her resolve stronger than before. She glanced back at the place where the figure had stood, its shadow lingering in her memory. She didn't know if it had been real or a manifestation of her own grief, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the choice before her. She stepped forward, her movements tentative at first, but with each step, her stride grew more confident. The firefly's light guided her, their hum a soft melody that steadied her trembling heart. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time she felt ready to face it. The shadows behind her faded, and the whispers of the forest grew distant. The fireflies led her onward, their glow a promise that the journey was not yet over. The forest opened like a secret unfurling, its shadows peeling back to reveal a space that shimmered with impossible light. Renna's breath caught as she stepped into a vast clearing, its edges blurred as though the world had forgotten where it ended. Above her, the sky was no longer the murky canopy of branches, but an expanse of shifting hues, gold and violet bleeding into each other like spilled ink. The fireflies surged ahead, their glow intensifying as they spiraled upward. The clearing came alive with movement as the light illuminated figures that had not been there moments before. They emerged from the air itself, ethereal and otherworldly, their forms both familiar and strange. Some appeared human, others like creatures pulled from dreams or nightmares. Their shapes shifted, their outlines soft, as though they were more ideas than beings. At the center of it, all stood an elven figure cloaked in silver, their presence commanding yet serene. Their skin shimmered like moonlight on water, and their eyes held the weight of ages. They raised a hand, and the fireflies stilled, their glow softening to a warm pulse. "Welcome, traveller," the elf said, their voice a melody that resonated in the very fabric of the air. "You have followed the light through shadow and silence. You have come to the parade." Renna stepped forward hesitantly, the fireflies parting to allow her through. The figures in the clearing began to move, forming a procession that circled the clearing in slow, deliberate steps. Their movements were graceful, almost hypnotic, as though they were caught in a rhythm older than time itself. "The parade," Renna repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this place? Who are these people?" The elf tilted their head, a faint smile touching their lips. "The parade is for those who have wandered too long in the dark," they said. "It is for the lost, the broken, and the weary. Here they walk in the light, shedding the weight of what binds them." Renna watched as the figures passed by her. Their faces shifted as they moved, showing glimpses of joy, sorrow, anger, and peace. Some wept silently, their tears catching the fireflies' light like falling stars. Others smiled, their expressions serene as though a great burden had been lifted. The air was thick with emotion, a tapestry woven from countless stories. "Why am I here?" Renna asked, her voice trembling. "What am I meant to do?" The elf regarded her with a gaze that seemed to pierce through her questions, reaching the core of her being. "You're here to walk, to see, and to understand. The path ahead is not ours to dictate. It is yours to discover." The fireflies gathered around her once more, their hum rising into a soft, beckoning melody. The figures in the parade seemed to notice her for the first time, their gazes meeting hers with a mixture of recognition and encouragement. Their light touched her skin, warm and soothing, as though it carried the weight of all the lives that had walked this path before her. Renna hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. She had followed the fireflies through the forest, driven by a need she could not name. Now, here in the radiance of the parade, she felt both exposed and unmoored, as though the ground beneath her might dissolve at any moment. But the fireflies' light steadied her. Their glow was a quiet promise, a reminder that she was not alone. Slowly she stepped forward, joining the procession. The figures around her shifted to make space, their movements fluid and welcoming. As she walked, she felt a strange sensation, a lightness, as though the air itself were lifting her burdens piece by piece. Memories surfaced as she moved, not the sharp, jagged fragments of grief that had haunted her, but softer ones, woven with warmth and joy. Her brother's laughter echoed in her ears, not as a ghostly lament, but as a celebration of the moments they had shared. The fireflies pulsed brighter, their light weaving around her like a cocoon. The elf watched her with an expression that was neither approving nor judging, but simply knowing. They raised their hand once more, and the parade began to dissolve, the figures fading into light that danced upward into the endless sky. Only the fireflies remained, their glow guiding Renna toward the edge of the clearing. As the last of the figures vanished, Renna turned to the elf, her heart full of questions she couldn't yet voice. The elf stepped closer, their silver cloak catching the firefly's light. "The light has guided you here, and it will guide you onward," they said. "But remember, the path is yours to walk. The fireflies cannot carry you." Renna nodded, a quiet resolve settling in her chest. She glanced at the forest ahead, its shadows no longer as intimidating as they had seemed. The fireflies formed a trail, their glow leading her forward. She stepped into the light, her heart steady, her steps sure. The parade had ended, but her journey had only just begun. The fireflies led Renna into the forest once more, their glow illuminating a path that seemed to wind through time as much as space. The trees around her were no longer gnarled sentinels, but graceful towers of light, their branches swaying in a breeze that she could not feel. The air here was alive, shimmering with unspoken promise, as though the very fabric of the world had softened to embrace her. Each step she took felt deliberate, as if the forest itself required her to walk with intention. The fireflies danced ahead, their hum rising and falling in waves that matched the rhythm of her breathing. Renna's heart no longer raced with fear or doubt. Instead, it beat in harmony with the light, steady and sure. The whispers returned, but they were different now, gentler, less intrusive. They spoke not of burdens or shadows, but of guidance, encouragement, and the quiet assurance that she was on the right path. Renna listened, their words weaving through her mind like threads of gold. "You are not lost. You are not alone. The way forward is yours." She clutched these words like a talisman, her steps growing lighter as the fireflies led her to the edge of the forest. The trees thinned, and the air became clearer, cooler. Ahead, she saw the faint outline of the village, its lanterns glowing softly in the distance like scattered stars. The sight filled her with a strange mixture of relief and hesitation. She was returning, but she was not the same. As Renna stepped into the open, the fireflies began to scatter. They drifted upward, their light dimming as they disappeared into the night. She watched them go, a pang of sorrow tugging at her chest. They had been her guides, her companions, and now they were leaving her to walk the final stretch alone. But as the last firefly vanished, she felt their light within her, a warmth that refused to fade. It was not the same as the lantern she had carried. It was deeper, more enduring. She touched her chest, where the warmth pulsed faintly, and smiled. The fireflies had not truly left her. They had simply become a part of her. The village was quiet as she approached, its streets wrapped in the stillness of the early hours. Yet as she neared the central square, she saw figures waiting in the dim glow of the lanterns. The villagers had gathered, their faces etched with a mixture of worry and wonder. "Renna," someone called, their voice tentative. She stepped into the square, her presence drawing gasps and murmurs. The people parted to let her through, their eyes wide as they took in her appearance. Renna realized she must look different, her steps surer, her expression lighter, her very being touched by the firefly's glow. "I thought you were lost," an elder said, their voice trembling. "The forest, it does not return those who wander too far." "I wasn't lost," Renna replied, her voice steady. "I was found." Her words hung in the air, resonating in the silence that followed. The villagers looked at her as though she were a mystery they could not unravel, but Renna didn't mind. She didn't need them to understand. The fireflies had shown her what she needed to see, and that was enough. The dawn broke slowly, its light spilling over the village like liquid gold. Renna watched from the edge of the square, her heart swelling with a quiet, unfamiliar joy. She felt lighter, as though the weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. The memories of her brother no longer clawed at her. They rested gently within her, a source of warmth rather than pain. As the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops, Renna turned back toward the forest. She could still feel its presence, vast and enigmatic, stretching beyond the horizon. The fireflies were gone, but their light remained, a part of her now and forever. "The way forward is yours," the whispers had said, and she believed them. Her journey was not over, but she no longer feared the path ahead. She carried the light within her, and that was all she needed. With a final glance at the forest, Renna turned and walked toward her home, her steps steady, her heart full. The village would wake soon, and life would go on. But she would never forget the fireflies' glow, nor the parade, nor the gift they had given her. And somewhere, deep in the forest, the fireflies waited, their light ready to guide the next lost soul to joy.